All right. So I was just saying thank you for the invitation to be here. I love talking about writing um, almost as much as I love actual writing. Just kidding. No, I really do love talking about writing and writing accountability. Um, Let me see if I can share my screen. So I'm going to be talking about developing and sustaining a writing practice. And I'm going to be kind of integrating this idea of writing accountability groups that I think some of you are familiar with already into the presentation. So, okay, I can advance. I cut out a lot of the introductory material, but I'm going to tell you who I am and just a very tiny bit about how writing has fit into my career path and the importance of writing groups in my own life. We're going to do a brief reflection and discussion, and then most of the talk is going to be talking about common myths about the writing process and things that you can do to avoid the traps. And spoiler alert, a lot of it is going to have to do with writing accountability groups. So we just went through the bio. I won't emphasize this, except that writing has gotten me through a few sticking points, writing accountability in particular. So one sticking point was this transition between being a postdoc and being an assistant professor, having a baby in the middle of that transition. And then I don't know if any of you in attendance or recording are tenure track folks and pre-tenure. That's another sticking point. And writing accountability has been really critical for this whole process. So my solution to all of the problems that I had at various sticking points were more publications. So this continued once I transitioned over to UIC from my previous faculty position. In my third year review, the only constructive area for improvement was that I needed more first or senior author publications. After promotion, someone said, oh, to make full professor, you'll need a lot more funding. So this is, it's just a constant thing. So through writing accountability groups, again, I won't belabor this just for the sake of time, but I've kind of broken down my career into these chunks with sticking points in between each one. And you can see that I've been able to increase my productivity, increase my amounts of funding, and ultimately get promoted throughout this process. And again, I attribute a lot of that to these practices that I'm going to talk to you about today, as well as writing accountability groups that I've been a part of really since 2009, 2008, 2009. So what do you do in a writing accountability group? We talk about appropriate goal setting. It provides structure. It provides accountability, of course, peer mentoring, which is really valuable. And through peer mentoring, you can identify and troubleshoot writing barriers. This is also an evidence-based method to improve writing productivity, and these habits have been shown to decrease writing-induced anxiety. So I want you to think about, we probably won't take the time to do like the full reflection activity, but I'd like you to think about where you are going. This is going to be very individual. So I want you to consider the importance of writing in the context of your own goals, and consider your goals in the context of your definition of success. And really, I'd like you to take the time on the weekends coming up, maybe take an hour, have a cup of tea, and really think about what your overall goals are and how writing can fit into those goals professionally. So think about what these sticking points might be for you. So even in a healthy work environment, there can be roadblocks. Um, so I want you to just take a moment, um, And we won't take a full minute. I'd like to invite you to share either in the chat or just turn on your mic if anyone is brave enough to share what some roadblocks might be, particularly related to writing. What are some barriers that keep you from writing as much as you think you should, or as much as someone told you you should be? Time. Okay, great. That's one of the top ones. So that can mean a lot of things. We'll talk a little bit about time management, other priorities, continuity. Great. Novelty. Okay. Maybe say a little bit more in the chat about what you mean by that, by novelty. I think maybe part of that, if I don't want to overinterpret it, but maybe keeping your interest and keeping momentum on a project. Continuity might go along with that. Okay. Let me screen roll in advance now. All right. Oh, the idea might not be novel. Okay, so that makes sense. Starting is another one. Starting is another major thing that I hear. So some of these are kind of internal and psychological. I think we can still kind of bust through some of these problems with just a consistent writing practice, and that's what we'll talk about now. You all got kind of deep, deeper than I was expecting. But yeah, it's important to think about these things. All right, so getting into the meat of the talk. Why you shouldn't believe them, but these are real challenges that people face, and I'm going to offer you some workarounds. Some authors and sources for this work are Carrie Ann Rockamore, who is the founder of the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, which UIC has an institutional membership to. So there's some resources there that I will mention again at the end. There's a fabulous, very short and very easily readable book called How to Write a Lot that some of these ideas come from. And in the 80s, Robert Boyce did some empirical work surrounding writing and the writing process in faculty. And there's a couple of books by Robert Boyce from, I think from the 80s or maybe late 80s. So the myth of the muse is the first one. Sometimes people say they need to be in the mood to write. They need to feel inspired or motivated to write. So perhaps some of these psychological barriers might come into this. Some people feel like they do their best work under pressure. So needing to have kind of that right situation. So to that, I might say, there is no muse. So what can we do about that? So typical responsibilities of a faculty member might include teaching, admin, seeing patients, research, all the tasks that go under those. And we don't actually wait to be inspired to do anything except maybe writing, right? So we don't wait to feel inspired to go to a meeting. You're never inspired to go to a meeting, but you're accountable to someone. Same thing with teaching, you're accountable to someone else. So I'm going to challenge you to be accountable to yourself and not actually wait to be inspired. So there's no writing muse. Writing is a job. It's a key part of our job as faculty members to develop and disseminate knowledge. So we should think about it as a job. And doing these practices kind of takes some of that emotion away from it. So it gets easier when you start to just kind of dissociate the emotion. Think of it as a job. So one suggestion is to write a little bit every day. So how to do this? I'm going to suggest to you that you schedule your writing in your calendar, respect that appointment the same way that you would respect an appointment that you have with someone else. And showing this respect means showing up, coming on time, and coming prepared, right? So you wouldn't go to a meeting with a research colleague and start looking around for your materials, right? You show up prepared with everything that you need. So that's one thing. Writing for less time than you think you should is another suggestion. And I'll get more into the timing of this later, but 30 to 60 minutes is fine. If you don't have that, 15 to 30 minutes is fine. And then the key thing that I think people neglect, including myself sometimes, is to stop when your time is up. So once you start writing, you might find that you get into a groove and you want to just keep going. Say you have a 2-hour block of unstructured time. You wrote for your half an hour that you plan to, but you're on a roll. It's actually really important to stop. And the reason for that is because you don't want to burn yourself out. You don't want to we'll talk about the time that it takes to start a new activity. You want to kind of maintain that momentum and carry that through to the next day. So if you write a little bit every day, writing becomes mechanical, it becomes automatic, it becomes just kind of part of your everyday routine. And as such, it provokes less anxiety. And according to Boyce's work, you actually write more. So one of Boyce's studies compared writers who wrote in brief daily spurts to writers who binged and wrote less frequently in longer periods of time. And the people who wrote for a little bit more frequently actually wrote more pages by the end of the observation period. So I've added a note, especially during this pandemic time. This writing everyday concept is like, I feel like it's like really critical, but it's off-putting to some people. So I want to throw this out there right at the beginning. This is not meant to be prescriptive. Daily writing might not work for everyone, and that's totally fine. I think the key thing to do is plan when you're going to write and plan when you're not going to write. Finding your own rhythm is really the key thing here. So maybe it's not every day, maybe it's every other day, maybe it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The idea is to get into that groove, get into that routine, and have your regular writing times consistently. All right, before I go on, are there any quick questions? I'll pause after each one of these 4 myths. Questions, comments?
Do you feel like it makes a difference if you say, I'm going to write 15 minutes a day, but Friday I have a little more time, so I'm going to write 2 hours on Friday? Is that like, do you recommend like being sort of consistent on your daily writing, or just the rhythm itself is the important thing?
That's a great question. I don't know if I've heard that question asked in that way. I think that's fine, especially if that's something that you're going to be able to do consistently. I don't know that there is anything inherently wrong with planning to write for a long space of time if you have that. The key things are kind of just like, I make a lot of analogies with exercise. You don't want to burn yourself out. You don't want to set yourself up to be like, oh, I wrote for 2 hours yesterday, I never want to look at this document again. So that's kind of the danger of writing for a long time. But it definitely can work for you. One of like the kind of productivity academic guru type folks that I follow on Twitter, and on her blog before Twitter came around, writes for 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. So it's just up to kind of what you can tolerate and what works for your schedule. All right. So the second myth is that you can't find the time to write. So you might feel like you have too many interruptions at your office. You might feel like you have too many other obligations. And again, this is not meant to be prescriptive. We're still in the chaos pandemic times. So consider that when I give these recommendations. Um, some people think that they can't write at all unless they have a big chunk of time and they're waiting for this mythical 4-hour period that never comes. So what I will say is that everyone has a busy schedule. Everyone has an outside life. Sometimes the grass is greener on the other side. Clinicians, non-clinicians, people that teach versus people that don't teach, admin versus non-admin. But I heard once, like, we all have the same 24 hours that Beyonce has, which is kind of a bad example because she has a lot of support staff probably that we don't have, but we're all working with the same 24-hour day. So it's just a matter of how we choose to wrestle and spend that time. It's not always easy, but there's probably something else that you do find the time to do every day. Some people read the newspaper every day, read the news every day. Some people exercise or have like a yoga practice that they do every day. So I'm challenging you to try writing as part of your daily ritual. Even just 15 minutes in the morning can create a great foundation for the day. Do your stretching, drink your water, write your 15 minutes. Think about making it a routine thing again, as we were talking about before. This is important. Productive writers in another Boyce study had the same amount of free time as less productive writers. So when you are challenging yourself to use your 24 hours in a different way, remember that by being more productive, you're not necessarily taking more time. Just again, kind of a personal anecdote that I kind of cut out from the beginning of the talk for time, but I'll say a short version of it now. I joke that having a baby was the best thing for my productivity because it just forced me to be more structured. So I had a stricter schedule. I had fewer hours. I had to really make good use of the time that I had. And learning these techniques around that time was actually really helpful and kind of helped me explode my productivity personally. So how to find the time? So you've got to look for it. So look for the right places physically and in your calendar. So maybe you don't need to be in your office once we go back to the after times. Maybe you do write for 15 minutes before you leave for work. Look for the right places in your calendar as well. If you're not a morning person, if that's not where you have your energy time, maybe don't write at that time. Maybe it's too difficult to write. Maybe you're a night owl and you want to write 15 minutes before bed. In any case, consider tracking your time for a week. Make sure that the way that you spend your time lines up with your priorities. So for example, if you are going to be judged for promotion based on your research activities, make sure that you're spending sufficient time devoted to your research compared to other activities. So just kind of do a calendar audit from time to time and think about how you're spending your days. I actually have a color-coded calendar. It's where just at a glance, I can look to see, all right, am I spending too much time on service this week? Maybe I need to balance this out. Okay, teaching really took over for the last couple weeks with finals. Let me think how I can balance that out in the next couple weeks. So Consider tracking, consider scheduling activities within the time that you actually have. Okay, so on this aspect of needing 4 hours, you actually need less time than you think. So we already talked about people who write for long, especially unplanned stretches, get less done and have more stress. One reason for that is because you spend a lot of time figuring out where you were when you left off. If you only write once a week or once every couple weeks, but you write for 4 hours at that time, you might spend an hour kind of getting your mind back into it, looking for your documents. So that's one reason to write for brief daily or near daily stretches. Writing is less emotionally charged. You have to really gear yourself up for a 4-hour stretch. For 15 minutes, you can do anything for 15 minutes. So again, if you can't find 30 minutes a day, which seems to be like the sweet spot that many authors recommend, try 15 minutes, try 10 minutes, whatever you can fit. Okay, any questions or comments about time at this point? We'll have some time for discussion at the end as well. Okay. Number 3 is this idea that you can't start until you're ready. So this is also very common. You feel like you need to finish collecting all your data. You need to run your stats or have the statistician you're collaborating with run your stats. You need to do all the reading. There might be a part that you particularly like that you get stuck on. There might be a part that you particularly hate that you procrastinate on. A corollary to this or a related thing is being stuck or feeling stuck while you wait for your slow co-author. So this is something that comes up a lot in writing groups is passing the document off to a co-author. The co-author takes several weeks to get back. You feel like you can't move forward with the project. So a couple things with this. Are you ever really ready to write? So has anybody, if we were in person, I'd ask you to raise your hands. Have you decided to run another experiment or do another statistical test after you thought you were done? Yes or no? Probably yes for most of us. Have you ever decided to include additional literature? Like you think maybe that you're going to sit down and do your exhaustive literature search and just do it once, but there might be new things that come up, or as you're writing, you might figure out new directions that you're going into. So I'm going to challenge you to not wait until you're ready. And then if you want to get advanced with this, you can start at the start. I have only done this a couple times, but it's actually been really effective the times that I have done it. So experiment with next time you're starting a new project, start writing up the manuscript when you have the idea or as soon as you get the funding or whatever the situation is. Why do this? Writing throughout the process helps you develop and refine your ideas. So you might start writing your method section as you're creating the protocol for your experiment and realize that you've forgotten something important or there's an additional control that you need to add. You will get more done, you'll waste less time because you'll figure out these issues as they come up. So my suggestion is to start at the start. So I've tried this with myself a couple times. My story that I always tell, like the best thing ever, was I had a medical student that was doing a summer rotation with me, and I was like, yeah, let's write a paper. So he had we talked about the project. I gave him the project. he did a literature search and I made him write his notes, like kind of write an introduction to the paper as he was doing his literature search, as he was pulling his data together. He planned out the statistical analysis as he got the data together, ran the stats, stuck the results in, and it was he, within the 12 weeks that he was with me, 10, 12 weeks, he had a full draft of a manuscript. It needed polishing, of course. I spent a lot of time and there was a lot of back and forth, but that first draft is the hardest part. So I always start, I said I don't do this 100% of the time, but I do always generally start with a good outline as I'm developing the project, as I'm kind of getting going on the project, to help me think about all these things. So it can be very efficient. So another little story, brief story. My sister-in-law at one point was writing a romance novel. And she blogged about the process, and she was having a hard time kind of figuring out what to do with these characters. And she had a breakthrough because she just kind of wrote through it. So she said on the blog, writing is not what you do after you figured it out, writing is how you figure it out. She doesn't remember saying this, but it really resonated with me. So I put it, I always mention it when I give a talk like this. So I just something else to think about. All right, so what about while you're waiting for that slow co-author, or if you are trying to figure out what you need to do that day? I would like for you to expand your definition of writing. So is this writing? Free writing about an idea, yes or no? Reviewing notes that you've taken, yes or no? Working on a table, right? You might not think of this as actual writing because it's not committing words to a page, but tweaking a table to get it properly formatted, either cosmetically or for the requirements of a journal. Entering references, formatting those references, writing a cover letter. Some journals still ask you for cover letters. All of this is writing. These are writing tasks that need to get done. So I say that writing is any of these activities that directly or indirectly causes more lines to appear on your CV. And you know, we could talk about CV management another time, but you want to make sure that you're consistently adding those lines to your CV. So any of these tasks will help with that. So another reason to expand your definition of writing is so many reasons. One reason is to give yourself credit for what you're already doing, right? So you might spend a day working on a table and feel like you have not much to show for it, but you should honor that time that you spent formatting that table. That was essential work that needed to get done. Another thing is that you can think about what writing tasks you can do before you're ready. So for example, free writing, or while you're waiting for your slow co-author. So when you send out a paper to co-authors, that might be a good time to format your tables and make them pretty. That might be a good time to write a cover letter. So think about these little writing tasks, and I'll talk about that more in another minute. All right, so any comments or questions about writing tasks or your definition of writing, or writing before you're ready? Okay, we can move on to our last one. This is the biggie, starting. So the two, this is kind of why they're the first and last things I like to talk about. The two things that consistently come up are time and don't know where to start, don't know how to start either your writing session or just feeling stuck on a project and not knowing where to begin. You might also put off the part that you hate, which for me is the discussion, even though that's supposed to be the best part because you're engaging with saying your interpretations. I always find that really challenging, actually. Or some people love doing figures and spend all their time making beautiful, gorgeous figures. So not knowing where to start or not knowing what to do is a biggie. Another problem is your to-do list might look like this. So if your to-do list, maybe you feel like you're really organized, but you have work on grant or finish paper as an item on your to-do list. That does not set you up for success. So we want to talk about how to set yourself up for success. So I want to acknowledge these feelings and honor those feelings. So sometimes we don't write because we feel overwhelmed. And this can be especially true during these pandemic times. Many of us have extra responsibilities at home. Many of us may have filled our former commuting time with extra work or extra projects. So this is true all the time, but I think it's especially the case during the pandemic that hopefully we're coming out of. So sometimes we don't write because we feel overwhelmed. So how to combat feeling overwhelmed or not knowing where to start? It comes down again to goal setting, appropriate goal setting. All right, so I imagine most people on this call don't remember this robot, Alfie. Maybe a few of you are also children of the 80s and might remember Alfie, but I picked this picture. I think about getting an imaginary robot, and I picked Alfie because if you look at the buttons, it's very, very simple. There's only a limited number of things that Alfie can do. So if you give your robot a task, even something, maybe it's not write grant, maybe it's something like finish results section, that's not going to work for your robot. You have to really break it down into more detail so that your robot can do your work for you. So thinking about programming your research robot means that finished results might become fill in your final group descriptives, clean up figure 3. Fill in final group descriptives might then become open the file, run the descriptives again, double check your stats, and copy your means and p-values into the document. All right, clean up figure 3 might be thinking about units or font sizes. So I'm going to encourage you to make your tasks more specific. And even, I mean, you don't have to make a separate task for opening a file, but I'll tell you why in a second, why I put that down there. You want to make your tasks as specific as possible so that you can do them as mindlessly as possible to, I don't think I've ever said it quite that way, but to be honest, like you want as much of your writing to be mindless work that just becomes automatic and mechanical, like we were saying before. So give your robot the time that it's going to take. Your robot is from the 80s. It's not that fast. So give it the time it needs. So this might be a 10-minute task. So you might need a minute to open your file, 2 minutes to do these stats, 2 minutes to do those stats, and 5 minutes to transfer it into your nice table. All right, so that's a 10-minute task. But what if you can't remember where the file was stored or what the name? Maybe you have a draft that's like final data set dot final actual final. So you might at 30 minutes. These are all ripped from my life. Once I had like a concern that I had actually coded men and women the opposite way that they were coded. So I had to kind of go back and figure that out and just reassure myself. Better run the stats again just to make sure that you didn't make any mistakes. So, oops, no oops. this 10-minute task might actually be a 50-minute task. All right, so once you have added up all these steps that came because you haven't looked at the document in 2 weeks and you are giving yourself 4 hours to binge on this, what should have been a 10-minute or less task is now a 50-minute task. All right, so the key is, one, hopefully you don't get in the situation, but two, if you are in the situation, make sure you plan for the time each task actually takes, not the amount of time you have or the amount of time that you want to spend on it. We talked about scheduling your time and looking in your calendar. So if you have a 10-minute time slot, don't schedule a 50-minute task for that 10-minute time slot. Another reason why it's great to break things down in this way is because maybe you have 10 minutes between Zoom meetings that you can pop a number into a table. If you have your tasks broken down mentally or actually in your to-do list sufficiently, you can make really good use of these little pockets of time that we find ourselves with. So how to decide how much time to give yourself? Think about what amount of time a task should take. And if you're just getting started with planning your time and thinking about time in this way, multiply that by 2.5 or 3. So if you think something's going to take you 10 minutes, give yourself 30 minutes to do it. If you think something's going to take you a week, give yourself 2.5, 3 weeks to take care of it. So with practice, you actually get better at judging how much time things will take. So now, like 13 years into this, I'm pretty good at, my reality rule has shrunk quite a bit. But when you're just starting out, try 3 for a reality rule. Okay. So a little bit of bad news. You may have seen this coming. You are the robot. There's no Alfie actually. So give yourself enough time and give yourself enough specificity in your tasks. So the 4 myths that we talked about were the myth of the muse. The solution for that is regular, ideally daily writing, not being able to find the time or being interrupted a lot. Try shorter spurts, waiting to be ready. We talked about starting at the beginning of the project, or at least thinking about honoring all of the writing that you're already doing, all of the tasks that count as writing. We just talked about not knowing where to start. We talked about de-emotionalizing that by having an imaginary research robot. So you will need support for all of this. So at the very least, you should get a writing buddy. But why are we here today? We're talking about writing groups. So why join a writing accountability group? So it's been shown that having support and accountability increases writing productivity. So this is the format that we started with when I first started setting these up back at my former institution. They've morphed somehow you can always tweak this formula to fit the needs of your participants, but we did 10-week sessions. We intentionally did it kind of off cycle with our we were on a quarter system. Right now with the CCTS, what we're doing is basically starting a few weeks into the semester, running it for a semester. It's an hour a week, so 30 minutes of discussion. You can split that into 2 15-minute periods and 30 minutes of communal timed writing. So what do we actually do? So I love sharing accomplishments from the previous week. I really emphasize that in the group that I moderate. I try to make people celebrate submissions. We celebrate everything, celebrate submissions, of course, celebrate acceptances, but submissions is the only part that you can control. So we try to celebrate that. Sharing barriers is a big part of it. So if someone has a slow co-author, we might brainstorm how you can communicate with them. And then articulating your goals for the following week is critical. We've even in the past had somebody, we write down their goals and be in charge of a document so to hold people accountable. Right now in my group, what we're doing is we have a Google sheet where we put our goals in, and someone had the idea of color coding it to be like green if you got all your goals, yellow if you made progress, and pink is ouch. And we talk about why the ouch. And then 30 minutes of communal timed writing. So the reason for that is because that maybe your week just got was a disaster. At least you have that 30 minutes that you can count on that you will definitely be writing. It also just really feels good, even in this virtual setting. I'll be writing, and if I start to slow down, I'll click back to the Zoom window and I'll see everyone else writing, and that kind of puts me back into it. And it's like group exercise, right? Like, yeah, I can do this. So that's how we ran the group. It's great to have 4 to 6, minimum 4 per session for each group that you set up. I have found that below 4, we kind of end up chit-chatting and just becoming friends, talking about our kids, etc. Above 6, it's hard to have, above 6 to 8, I would say it's hard to have enough time in that hour to have everyone share. Different departments or a mix of roles is sometimes good because we want to avoid talking about content. It's not about the content, it's about just holding each other accountable. And also I would say another reason why we kind of did 10-week sessions was to accommodate clinicians who have whose schedule changes periodically, because it's really important that you're able to attend most of the meetings that you sign up for. So again, you have to be open. You have to be open to doing this. Commit to scheduled writing, preferably daily, but whatever you commit to the process. And then respect each other's privacy. A lot of times sensitive issues come up in writing group. We've talked about how interpersonal issues or personal kind of emotional issues can come up in the writing process. It's important that we respect each other's privacy, and what happens in writing group stays in writing group. Except for all the great tips that you're going to learn from each other. So learning from each other. So these are just a few of the tips that have come up in writing groups that I've been involved in. So writing for an hour at home before coming in, which also served the purpose of letting traffic die down. 30 minutes in the morning, the key thing for that person was to do it before checking email. Someone in my first writing group experimented with dictating, using her dictation service or software that she was using for her clinic notes, to do notes for paper. I've done that where I record a voice memo or like voice to text on my phone while I'm waiting for the train, and I'll pretend like I'm talking to my phone, but I'm actually like free writing. I'm thinking about notes for a grant typically. Deciding when not to write is also very important, just for your mental health and for all the reasons that we already said. Another one that has come up that hasn't made it to the slide yet is if you're in an interruption-rich environment, you might not be able to, you might have 30 minutes throughout the day, but it might not come all at once. So we had one person set a timer for 30 minutes, stop it when someone comes in her office or when she gets in the email, start it up again, stop it, start it. And she has found that to be really effective. She has an active research lab as well as an important administrative position. So she's pretty busy. So I want you to pause and just think for a minute or two. So we talked about a bunch of things today, a bunch of hopefully good information that you can use, but don't try to completely rework your life at once. So try one or two small steps. So I'd like for a few volunteers, either in the chat or verbally, to say like one step that you might, one thing that you might incorporate.
Hi. For me, I think just start writing as I'm thinking through the process. I have a lot of ideas for things, and I think if I just kind of start typing, that'll be a good start versus trying to, I don't know, figure out all the details that kind of stop me from starting to write.
Awesome. Great. Anyone else? I see a couple in the chat. Scheduling, daily writing. Awesome.
I agree with the trying the smaller time segment.
Okay. Are you a binger?
No, but I currently have an hour on my schedule and I never do it, so I need to scale back.
Okay. Yeah, when I first started doing this as a postdoc, it was actually really difficult for us Dr. Matthew, it was Dr. Lundberg that I first started doing this with, and we like could not write for even half an hour. Like we couldn't focus for that long. So we pared it down to 15 minutes and kind of worked up to that. But yeah, another kind of the opposite of that is if you're not able to like use that whole time well. So shorter spurts, that's great. All right, anything else?
Yeah, so I have a comment. So like, thank you for all the information. Like, it's very helpful. So I joined like UIC has this writing group, like the 8-week practice, each like 30 minutes each day. I found like it was very helpful because certainly once I start to write, I usually will be a little more than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But that I try to make it very productive because you thought, oh, okay, today I may do not have time to write, but I try to finish the 30 minutes. Then I start to write, I can write a little longer, like maybe like 40 minutes. But then I try to get things done within this 30 or 40 minutes, a lot of things done. So it's just like after this, like then I think like I didn't, it's a little, sometimes if you only you write yourself, it's sometimes a little hard to try to do that every day, to check every day. So that's one. But it is very, I found this is actually make you actually much more productive than to write in the 30 minutes.
I agree.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have 30 minutes. I've had times when, so one thing that we talk about that sometimes comes up is juggling multiple projects. And I've had times when I want to maintain momentum on a manuscript, but I have a grant deadline. So one thing that I've done in those situations is like, sometimes my writing task for the manuscript is literally just to open the document, see where I left off, close the document, keep it moving. And then like it's in your brain when you are able to get back to it. I see something else in the chat. Okay, short sessions addressing things that we like and things that we don't like. That's great. Maybe you can think about starting with what you like, or like starting with what you don't like, and then giving yourself a little treat at the end of that with like making a figure if you like making figures. So that's great. All right. So any other questions or comments?
Dr. Karma, this is Vishal. Thank you for the presentation. It was really helpful. I just wanna ask, like, sometime I always have the phase like, if I start writing in 15 days, I'll be finishing that. But I always have difficulty taking up new project. So then that break comes, and once that break hits, it takes couple of days to again go back to writing and then restarting some new project.
Yeah. So I would say maybe honor that. Maybe after you run a marathon, most people don't run a marathon the next day. Or even start training for their next marathon the next day. So maybe you do need a little bit of a break to reset between projects. If you feel like you really need to kind of get a publication pipeline and you don't have that, I would suggest making sure that projects are at different phases so you're not totally starting from scratch. And maybe that start at the start idea might be helpful. It's just starting with some free writing. So those are a couple things that you might think about.
Thank you.
I just have one question, but first I wanted to just mention, I know we're getting close to 5 o'clock, so in case anybody has to drop off, so there is an interest in establishing more writing accountability groups on the Rockford campus. We do have one in Hipster, which we only have 3 of us, so we do have space for more colleagues. But also you can reach out to Dr. Matthew or Vicky or me with your interest, and we will help facilitate that. But I do have a question for Dr. Fouché. I feel like often I'm working on multiple manuscripts at the same time, or sometimes it's like you're working on a grant and you just like pause all of the manuscript writing during that time. But do you recommend like, okay, I need to just focus on this and get it done, or like is the going back and forth? What are your thoughts about that?
That's super individual. I have found now through like lots of trial and error that I can't really focus on more than one thing at a time. So I'll pretty much just have one major writing project going on. So for example, this week, I'm working on an R01, but there is an abstract deadline. So I got the R01 to where either I could do some mindless tasks, admin tasks on it, or not look at it at all, just set it aside for a couple of days so I could come to it fresh. And during those couple of days, I worked on the abstract. So some people think about having a pipeline and kind of staggering things. Some people think about having a morning block for one project, an afternoon block for another project. So I have found that it's very individual, and you kind of have to just play around with your process and figure out what works for you. I'm not a multitasker, and I've kind of accepted that about myself.
It looks like there's another good question in the chat.
Oh, let's see. So the question is, sorry, I can't quite see all of it.
I'm in a residency. Do you think there's a place for this in a training program? When did you start WAG groups in your career? I would love to write more about the demand of clinical practice, keeping up with current management, and being a resident in general is very time consuming.
Yeah, so I started this as a postdoc transitioning into my first faculty position. I'm trying to think if I've ever had residents in the group. And I don't know that I have. It's not easy. I don't know. I feel for folks in that situation. I think that's where you might think about those tricks that the clinicians do, the 15 minutes rather than 30 minutes, the finding small chunks of time and matching small tasks to small chunks of time. I think that, and being flexible with yourself and being realistic about the time, like I'm saying on this slide, realizing how much time you don't have can be really powerful, and choosing how you spend your time can be really powerful. I think it can be done. I think maybe making sure that you're in a group with someone else that understands your situation. So maybe have a residence group or have a clinicians group, or make sure that there's at least one other clinician in your writing group, so you can share tips and tricks and figure out what works for you.
Thank you. That was super helpful.
So the last thing that I'll say is just, you have the power, own your choices. So sometimes writing is not important. Sometimes you, like for you all, sometimes maybe you literally have to save someone's life. So writing is not always the most important thing. So choose when to write and choose when not to write. Writing is a job, so do your job each day and de-emotionalize the process. And so just a quick summary, prioritize schedule, write early and often, be your research robot, finding support and accountability. So just a couple of resources I'll leave up. The last link is to, the last two links are online writing communities. The first one you have to pay. The second one, we have an institutional membership to, and they have several writing types of challenges. That can be a great bridge if your schedule doesn't permit an in-person or a writing group through the university. All right, so it was great talking with you all. I watch out for at least one CCTS writing related workshop in the fall. Feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to stay on for a couple more minutes if people have more questions. So thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fouché. We really appreciated and enjoyed your insights and tips.
Great. I hope something was useful. I hope everybody got at least one thing that they can try. And it's always nice for me as well to get some refreshers on these things. It's work in progress.
On behalf of Office of Research, thank you, Dr. Fouché, for your time, and it's a really educational, and I believe that we can practice something, slow process. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording now, but if people have questions,